So you've been hearing a bunch about hardcore classic WoW recently, and I've been thinking about getting into it, or maybe you have already given it a try and remember that vanilla questing is pretty punishing at times. I've kinda been in the same boat, and between Raiding and Wrath I've been playing more and more vanilla once again. Weird flex, but during Classic originally I leveled a total of 10 characters from 1 to 60. I even made a video about it, and during that time I learned a whole lot about questing, so today I thought I'd dig into some of the mechanics of vanilla leveling, share some tips and tricks, as well as things to keep in mind on your hardcore journey. So what I'll be covering today will be more general tips that any player or class could use as starting points. They aren't in any particular order, but there is so much difference between vanilla leveling and how it is during any other version of WoW that there's quite a bit to talk about here. I want to start off with a few add-ons which are good on any class. As per usual with add-ons, different setups may achieve the same result, but this is what I know works. First up is a combination of 4 add-ons: Omni CC, Classic Cast Bars, Modern Target Frame, and Classic Aura Durations. These 4 bring back functionality to the enemy's target frame by more clearly displaying your debuff durations, enemy buff durations, enemy health values, and enemy cast bars. Omni CC does a full overlay on the enemy character portrait when affected by hard CC. Note that the enemy cast bars aren't perfect. Sometimes low level enemies have low rank spells which have shorter cast times, and the add-on doesn't always recognize that, but it's better than nothing. Weapon swing timer is good for those who melee, both to judge your damage output as well as your enemies. For me, this is an essential on Hunter who need to stand still during their auto attack windup and have both melee and range swing timers. Vendor price adds a value to all items so you can see, well, how much they vendor for. Really good for when you're working out your gold, when you want to go and buy skill ups or train some weapons, buy your mount, whatever it may be. Also helps you judge quest rewards when you're not going to equip them. Spellbook Abridged adds a filter to hide spell ranks in your spellbook. It just makes things a bit cleaner really. The majority of the time you will want to be using your max rank. For pure melee classes, the game does this automatically because there is no benefit to downgrading, such as on Rogue or Warrior. Also, when you macro any ability, if you include the spell without any rank, it will always use the highest learned rank. If you do not do this, remember to drag new levels of spells out of your spellbook onto your bar each time you learn them. Additionally, on abilities, some of them just aren't worth the price. I would need to talk about this on a class by class basis, but if you can't say how you're going to be getting any use out of the ability, it might just not be worth buying. For example, if I'm leveling a hunter, I would probably ignore all tracking abilities bar hidden. I would ignore aspect to the pack, aspect to the beast, disengage, mongoose bite, scorpion sting, volley, and the point is, a lot of abilities aren't always worth the price tag at the level you can first learn them. Getting a mount at level 40, however, which needs 100 gold, that is pretty important. You can judge mobs roughly by their name. If they're called Slayer, they're gonna have Execute. If they have Run in their name, they're gonna run faster than normal. I swear I'm not making this up. If they're Mystic, Shaman, Wizard, Sorcerer, expect them to cast spells. You can make an educated guess as to what you are fighting before you engage it. Alternatively, there is an add-on that does this called Classic Bestiary. Note that it will often have the correct ability listed, but not the correct details for it. So tons of mobs have Enrage, but there's many different variations of the Enrage spell. Up to you whether you want to use it. It's pretty powerful, but it will save you a lot of unprepared deaths. Some of the biggest abilities to look out for are stuns, roots, and heals. One of the most dangerous mob mechanics is Thrash. A ton of different mobs have this with absolutely no rhyme or reason as to why. It's basically Wind Fury adding 2 extra attacks to their next hit, so whenever a mob has Thrash you need to be particularly careful with your health. It's also not a visible buff on the mob when it's going to Thrash, so you don't know when they're going to do it. On top of that, mobs can store Thrash charges, so if you engage a mob who uses this ability, has it come off cooldown and uses it again without hitting you, this can happen if you're kiting. If they ever do get to you and hit you, they will hit you with their melee and then both thrashes, meaning 5 attacks in one go. This is unlikely, but I thought I'd give it a mention. Next, yeah, I can totally fit through there. You know what I'm talking about. You're going somewhere, 2 mobs are about the same distance apart, and you think you can just about fit between them. You try, and you end up pulling both of them. This can be the start of a situation that gets out of hand. It's vanilla leveling after all, and you're going to be doing some grinding, so just pick one side, kill one, move on. Casters are disproportionately dangerous early on. Many of them just have spells which are plain overtuned for the level they're found at. Back in original Classic, Defias Pillagers were more dangerous than most raid bosses. Having cast bars, which we've already gone over, will allow you to judge when to dip around a corner to avoid damage if you're able to. I should also mention caster leeway. You know how sometimes you're running away from a caster, you are super far away and they still get their cast off. That is casting leeway. You benefit from it too, by the way. If you start a spell and the mobs run out of range, you gain a few extra yards where your spell can still fire off. Enemies always have larger than usual cast ranges too. For example, Defias Pillager's Fireball is a 40-yard ranged cast. Run early if you're gonna run, and try and line of sight as a priority. Spatial awareness is a big thing. Playing zoomed in makes things harder than they already are. Setting the camera to max zoom for the in-game options is good, but you can go beyond that with this macro. You may not want it that far out, but generally speaking, being more zoomed out is a good thing. One of the biggest and easiest to miss bits of quality of life in Wrath is that after suffering 2 spell knockbacks on a cast, you'll be immune to further knockbacks and will cast like enemy mobs do. In Classic, this protection does not exist. If you're getting hit, you're going to be getting your spell knocked back. This is particularly dangerous against fast attacking enemies such as those dual wielding or cats, so get them low health before they're in your melee range as a caster. Some mobs are immune to certain attacks. This has been implemented in a pretty inconsistent way, but should be kept in mind. If it's a fire elemental, Fireball ain't gonna do anything. Same goes for water elementals and the frost school. Rock and wind elementals are immune to nature. Shamans have a really bad time in Silithus from what I remember. Some rock mobs are also immune to bleeds. Some of them aren't. As for mechanical units, there isn't really a ton of them in the game, but they're immune to a lot of things, including bleeds, incapacitate, fear, life drain, and horror effects. Warlocks on Alliance, I'm just saying, Harvest Reapers in Westfall, if you underestimate them, you're gonna die really fast. Undead are also immune to fear effects as well. Sometimes they're immune to horror, sometimes they're not. Again, it's pretty inconsistent. Next is something I call aggro delay. I never really hear about this one be talked about, but I use it quite often when I'm not 100% that combat's going my way. So if you're in combat with a mob and you move, it will either follow you instantly, or it will just kind of stand still for around a second before resuming chasing you. That second is often enough time to be able to kite, wait for cooldowns, or escape. This can sometimes take several attempts to trigger, but at least on lower level mobs is quite consistent. There's a number of low health mob interactions too. Some will run in fear at low health. These are almost exclusively humanoid mobs, though for some reason does include tall striders, I don't know why, and often mobs which have a young tag in their name. Save some CC or a big damaging ability to ensure low health mobs don't make it to others and create a difficult situation. On top of that, when mobs reach low health, their movement speed is reduced. This is very important to know for kiting. I want to say different mobs interact differently with this though. I would say on average, some mobs have a reduced movement speed under 35% health, most have a larger reduction below 20%, and nearly all have the biggest reduction below 10%. I know this isn't the most exact information, but it's generally good to be aware of. Strafing is important to learn. So strafing is moving in a direction whilst your character is facing a different one. You can directly bind strafing instead of turning on your key bindings, or just hold down right click and begin moving. I've always done the right click version. Whilst there is a time and a place for backpedaling, sometimes you need to be getting away from mobs a little bit faster than that, and most of the time strafing is just better. It stops you from getting dazed since you have to be hit from behind for this to happen, and allows you to keep dodge, block, parrying, all of that stuff, aka free mitigation whilst you're running away. Very good practice to learn, though keep checking what's in front of you and where you're going. Mob leashing. This is a super important mechanic to understand in Classic. In short, the rule of thumb is that mobs will chase you for a certain period of time after engaged in combat. Whenever you hit a mob, it resets its leash timer. This is why some mobs seem to follow you forever and ever, and you're wondering why they're not resetting. If you do not intend to kite a mob, you must stop hitting it back. This also goes for pets as well, as they have their own leash. I stop attacking by just hitting escape on my keyboard. Understanding how to strafe and how mob leashing works will save your character again and again. Next is parry haste. So when an attack is parried, the person who parried, be it you or the enemy, will have their next melee swing timer reduced by 50%. meaning parries are actively a damage gain on top of damage mitigation. This can be very noticeable taking on enemies using two-handers when you're dual wielding, or vice versa. A lot of burst damage can come out of nowhere. Parry haste is one of the factors why fighting green mobs feels easy and orange mobs are difficult. Level difference between you and your target counts for a huge deal, affecting stats such as dodge, parry, hit, block, resist, and glancing blows. Treat the enemy mob's level as a guideline for, is this such a good idea? I'd straight up avoid red level mobs. I mean, it's hardcore. Why are you fighting stuff that's more than 5 levels above you anyway? In addition to that, mobs 3 or more levels above you have a 15% chance to deal a crushing blow, with a further 5% for each level thereafter. These are regular attacks that deal 150% of their normal damage. So in short, just fight stuff around the level you're at, or your health bar can really disappear out of nowhere. By default, the game has start attack and interact on right click, meaning if there's an aggressive or neutral enemy where you thought there was not, you're going to be attacking them, possibly PvP flagging or hitting a guard by accident. If you put interact on left click, you won't have that risk. Keybind, you will have panic abilities, health pots, training dummies if you went engineering, cooldowns, and so on. You don't want to be trying to escape a dangerous situation and trying to click things at the same time. Bind your items, bind your abilities. Vanilla also gives you loads of handy quest items early game, such as super sticky glue, explosive rockets, bag of marbles, and so on. Remember these items, keep them on a keybind, and get the most out of them. Next is, just because it looks like a solid object does not mean it is one. In World of Warcraft, some walls are not really walls. Good examples of this are hills or trees. Mobs will still be able to shoot or cast through them. Also, troll ruins are notoriously poorly designed. Take example the large ruins in northwest Stranglethorn Vale. The big blocks on the edge of each walls do count for line of sight, but the walls between them do not. Mobs will aggro and cast through them. There isn't too many good rules to follow here, but just be aware of that. Caves and dynamic respawns. So some areas are designed in a way where the game aims to balance the number of mobs present at any given time through dynamic respawns. This means if an area is highly populated, mobs will respawn at a faster rate to compensate for more people farming. This is very dangerous when you're in a cave. Things look clear when you walk in, you engage a mob, and then out of nowhere everything starts respawning and you get cornered off. Play safe in caves and always assume you could be fighting 2 things, or maybe even more, at once. On top of that, your get out of jail free card won't always work. Again, this could be more class specific, but most classes have some kind of way to reset a fight which can fail. Feign death can be resisted and mobs will just keep hitting you. Sometimes you fear a mob and it runs in the direction you're trying to escape to. Intimidating shout can resist, and the list goes on. Don't always play around having one specific tool which has to work. Have multiple exit routes. Mobs can also heartbeat resist most CC, meaning after a crowd control effect has landed, every so often the game will perform a check to see if the mob resists the ongoing effect. If they do, it will end early. This means your polymorph, which says it lasts for 40 seconds on the tooltip or whatever it is, only lasts for 4 instead. Heartbeat is directly affected by the difference in level between you and the target's resistances to the applied spell school, and the length of the CC. Vertical mob range. Once something has aggroed on you, if you are directly below or above them, they will be able to hit you with melee attacks, as enemy attack range does not care about verticality in this game. This means when you're running down a tower trying to escape, things are going to be hitting you from above even though they're absolutely nowhere near you. Yes, it is very scuffed, but you should absolutely be aware of it. You know what area is entirely vertical? Underwater. If you're swimming upwards, things below you are going to be hitting you. Also, this makes ships particularly dangerous as they're on several levels where mobs can easily hit you. I would say if you can, swim upwards at an angle instead of straight vertically. Also, watch your breath meter. In Wrath it got buffed to 3 minutes, in Classic it's 1 minute. So unless you're playing undead, be very careful about underwater. And remember, warlocks can buff underwater breathing and shamans can too with a reagent. And my final thing to say has to be, don't get too attached. Remember, death equals delete. Your first character almost certainly will not be your last one. On your hardcore journey, you're going to be completing many quests. Whether it's carrying a package halfway across the world, collecting hooves from apparently hoofless zebra, or delving into a dungeon to defeat a boss, classic leveling is something that takes a long time, even for the most experienced of players. During that journey, certain quests that you come across may prove a little more difficult than others. In fact, some of them are just straight up incredibly overtuned and not fair at all towards the player. Those are the quests we are going to be talking about today. Whether the quest is a trap, a dangerous escort, or just in a cave in general, there are some quests out there which you should probably give a second thought towards before you accept them unprepared. Now, of course, there are elite quests in the game which you're expected to be in a group for, and there are even people who try to solo dungeons too. And whilst these are feats of strength in of themselves, well, you're meant to be in a group. The quests I'll cover today are things which are specifically not marked as elite and can easily catch you off guard if you approach them solo, or if you don't read the quest text, because quite a few of these quests do drop hints that you should probably bring more than one person. And it is difficult narrowing it down to just 10, but for me, these are some of the hardest quests to attempt on your hardcore character. Starting off over in the Western Plaguelands, you will have had a good amount of time on your character when you reach this quest, and have already gotten way further than most will. But in these later game zones are some really nasty quests. The first one I want to touch on is called A Matter of Time. It's a quest from Chromie in Anderhol that has you use a temporal displacer on nearby silos to summon and then destroy 15 temporal parasites. It sounds simple enough, but there are two problems here. First up is the fact these parasites spam a slowing effect, which makes it difficult to escape and totally ruins melee DPS. Second is how many of them can spawn. After you use the displacer, up to 3 parasites can spawn at one time, and after you kill one, there is a chance for another to respawn and take its place. I'm not sure what the limit is on how many can spawn at once and replace others, and I feel as though I've seen about up to 6 total personally. This makes the quest particularly dangerous, as you can't be sure whether there is another spawn coming or not. What I'd suggest doing if you're on a class less able to handle many mobs at once is to use the silos on the southeast of Anderhol. Make sure you're only summoning parasites from one of the silos, and then use the nearby water to reset aggro. This technique worked during Classic, and it still should on Era too. Next is another quest from the Plaguelands, this time over to the east. It's kind of a surprise the first time you see this person here, but Tyrion Fordring himself is holed up at a small house in the northwest of the zone. He has a huge lore-heavy quest line involving a whole lot of mob grinding and dungeon running. One of the early parts of this quest is named Of Forgotten Memories. It has you go retrieve an item that's been buried outside a crypt to his south, and it seems like a pretty simple recovery quest. But it is not. When you loot the dirt pile, a level 57 named NPC and 3 level 55s will spawn. For some reason, all of these guys do way higher damage than average for their level, in addition to having over 5,000 health each. Simply put, taking on all 4 at once is going to be very challenging, especially if you are under-leveled. The good news is you only need to defeat the 57 to loot the item you need, and there are several ways to do this quest pretty safely. First of all, if you're playing any ranged class in the game, there is a small broken down part of the fence nearby to where you loot the dirt pile. If you run up to this, tap jump and forwards and then do that again, you'll be able to jump over it. The mobs will have to run far around to the side in order to reach you here, so you can simply wear the leader of the robbers down, loot him and then reset the other mobs. If you're a melee, you need to do a split pull on the mobs. In order for this to work, you need to aggro all 4 mobs at the same time with a single attack. You can't pull one mob and have the others aggro off of him and follow you. That won't work. The best way to do this is via a consumable that deals AoE damage, such as grenades. And even if you aren't an engineer, you still get nades from various quest rewards, so you'll probably have some on you. So you nade the mobs, run away, keep the 57 in combat with thrown weapons or other attacks, and after a while the 55 should reset, leaving you with a 1v1. And you should keep running with a 57, as the 55s might just re-aggro anyway. Or, you know, just run in, blast all your cooldowns and hope for the best. That can work too. Next is first of the defend against waves of enemies types of quest on this list, called Pawn Captures Queen. It's fairly deep into a quest chain which starts in Thaurissan and takes place in Ungoro Crater. This has you use an item to summon mobs in the back of a cave. After using the item, 2 mobs will instantly spawn to defend the hive. Upon defeating them, 3 more will instantly spawn, and when you defeat them, the queen herself will spawn alongside 2 more mobs. The big tip here is you don't need to instantly fight one wave after the other. If you stand towards the entrance of the room, you'll be able to eat and drink up to full health and mana in between each wave. As for the last wave with the queen, you only technically need to defeat her for the quest item, and then you could run away and de-aggro the other 2 mobs, but this is risky. There's a pretty good chance that enemies will have started to respawn back near the entrance of the cave, and you could just be running back into even more danger, so I plan to defeat all 3 waves if possible. Next I want to cover one Horde specific and one Alliance specific quest. These are both very difficult and should be approached with caution on a hardcore character. The Horde one is Test of Endurance, which takes place in 1000 Needles. This is part of a really long quest chain, which during this part has you go into a nearby Harpy cave, another cave quest, get used to seeing them, and defend against several waves of enemies. And despite this quest taking place around level 30 or so, it is way more dangerous than the one we just talked about in Ungoro. After destroying one of the food crates, you start the encounter, which will summon 2 Harpies in the first wave, 2 Harpies in the second, 3 Harpies in the third wave, and 2 Harpies as well as the final boss in the last wave. Each wave comes in really fast, giving you very little time to recover in between each set. The cave also has extremely high mob density and very low respawn times, meaning that respawns will have more or less guaranteed happened by the time you're towards the end of the waves. If that doesn't sound bad enough, they also spam a silence effect, meaning if you're a caster, this quest gets way more difficult as you're stuck wanding for the most part. All in all, you should either overlevel this quest with all your cooldowns and potions available, or just probably consider skipping it if you're a caster. On the Alliance, one of the more dangerous early game quests I can think of is the escort part of the Absentminded prospector. This has you take an NPC around a dig site in search of a relic. Escort quests are already notorious in World of Warcraft, mostly for having mobs which move a bit faster than you walk, but slower than you run. But this one has a whole other level of challenge. First of all, a dig site might as well be a cave as it has 1 entrance and 1 exit. The NPC you're escorting is level 16, whereas mobs in the dig site range from 18 all the way to 21. There are both very fast respawns and dynamic respawns in effect here. Dynamic meaning there must always be a certain number of enemies in the area at one time, so if you are unlucky, you can get rid of 1 golem and another instantly spawns to take its place. I've had this happen to me before. But the real danger here is the trogs that attack towards the back of the camp. You get 1 melee and 1 caster who can spawn up to level 21. This escort quest feels as though you need good RNG to take it on at a level appropriate to the quest, because when you first visit this area around level 17 to 18, good luck. That's all I'm gonna say. Speaking of dangerous escort quests, you can't mention the subject without talking about the chicken quests. There are 3 in total, all of which started from random zone-wide drops in mid to late game areas. Each one of these has a reputation due to the sheer number of mobs that you have to fight off during each of them. But if you are able to do these quests, they give amazing XP, good item rewards, and if you do all 3, you get a mechanical chicken of your own, which you can even trade on the auction house if you want to. For me, the least dangerous chicken quest is in Feralus, simply because 2 of the patrols that you run into are on the road, where there isn't a real risk of pulling anything else. Don't get me wrong, it's not exactly easy all the same, but the mobs you fight tend to be a little bit lower level than you are as well. The second hardest chicken quest for me is the one in Thaurissan, and there's only really 1 difficult patrol to deal with, but it's really difficult. Around where you see a bunch of rocks, there will be 3 high-level Scorpid that spawn, which also apply a stacking poison debuff. The Scorpid themselves will already pose a problem for most players, but there are also several normal mobs roaming the area too, which can easily chain pull in the fight. Oh, and also, if somebody has failed this quest before you, these Scorpids stay alive in the world for ages and just kind of auto-fail the next person attempting the quest. But the hardest chicken escort has to be the one in the hinterlands. There are already dangerous patrols on the road with nearby mobs roaming about, but the bit that makes it challenging is the final encounter against the Vile Branch ambushers. The issue here is that there are stealthed wolves all over the place, and it's nearly impossible to fight both the trolls without accidentally pulling additional mobs into the fight, making things even harder than they already are. There are two things you can say about these escort quests, and indeed all escort quests for that matter. Pre-clear where possible. If you know where you're going, you can ensure that the way is safe, apart from the additional NPCs that will spawn. And secondly is sometimes you don't need to fight anything at all. If the NPC you're escorting does not enter combat with the patrol, they will just keep running along happily, and as long as you don't fall too far behind, you will not fail the quest. This can be consistent to pull off once you have a mount, and before that some classes can handle kiting mobs better than others. Mages can take enemies to the side and freeze them forever, and hunters can pull out mobs and feign death, and so on. Next is a quest back in STV called Stranglethorn Fever. This has to be one of the most dangerous defense quests in the game. In fact, I'd say there's only one harder than this. The saving grace here is that this quest takes place outdoors, so you can pretty easily escape if things go wrong. Either way, the objective is to loot the heart of Mock the Savage. Getting him to spawn though can be tricky. First up, you need to collect 10 gorilla fangs to begin the event. The first wave you'll run into is 3 enraged gorillas to deal with. After that, you have a short amount of time to recover before the next wave of 5 gorillas will arrive. You must deal with all of these whilst ensuring that the quest's troll NPC remains alive. After that, the last wave of 6 gorillas, including the boss, will come. Now this is kind of the easiest wave, as you no longer need to keep the NPC alive and only need to defeat the named mob, Mock the Savage. So you can just hide out of line of sight or in stealth, wait for the gorillas to engage the NPC, and then pull out Mock by himself, defeat him, and then run off and reset the rest. As a tip on this quest, the next wave won't spawn until all the gorillas from the last one are defeated, so keeping one mob CC'd or at low health and waiting for cooldowns is a very viable tactic. Next is an escort quest you should probably skip unless you've seen how it works firsthand, because what the game pulls on you here is kind of just not very fair, and I've seen so many hardcore deaths on this quest. It's none other than Get Me Out of Here in Desolace. It has you lead a level 39 NPC out of a centaur camp. The first patrol you have to deal with is a set of 4 level 40 centaur, though if you hang to the left of the pathway, the NPC should be able to just about avoid them without you having to intervene. The problem here is the second patrol, which has 3 centaur and 2 hyena pets. This pack is nasty for so many reasons. The hyena can see through stealth, so don't even think about sneaking past them, and the centaur disarm as well as spam a net, so it drastically cuts down the DPS of meleeers and makes it very difficult to escape in general. This also makes kiting the mobs to the side problematic if you end up getting rooted at a bad time. It's worth a try if you want to have a go at a challenging quest, but you really do have to go out of your way to pick this one up. Next, it's back to Stranglethorn Vale again. There's quite a few hard quests in this zone, for the last part of the quest line named the Bloodsail Buccaneers. So the earlier parts of this quest have you investigate the Bloodsail and defeat some swashbucklers. You usually do this around level 41, maybe 42, and then you get a follow-up quest to assault the Bloodsail ships, which are just anchored off the coast of Stranglethorn Vale. You have to fight your way inside each of the 3 separate ships, which both have extremely high mob density, fast respawn rates, and way higher combat levels compared to the rest of the zone. To top it off, the objective of the quest is to defeat the captains. Each of these captains have been bumped up a few extra combat levels, ranging from 46 all the way to 48. So taking on this quest as soon as you can after having done the previous one is incredibly risky. Also, there is a little gap in the ship's stairs as you head down below deck, and if you get unlucky, mobs can see through there and aggro and end up chain pulling 3 or 4 others, leading to a situation that can very quickly get out of hand. This quest is one to come back to at a higher level for sure. Honourable mention to a quest here, which isn't exactly difficult per se, it's just impossible to do it without dying. As part of the Lincoln quest chain that starts in Ungoro Crater, you have to create a Vidair elixir. If you use this while standing in the graveyard in Tanaris, it will instantly kill you, allowing you to speak with a ghost to continue the quest chain. So yeah, goes without saying, you probably don't want to be doing this on your hardcore character. And finally, it's probably the hardest quest in the entire game to do at a level appropriate to it. Honestly, I don't know what Blizzard was thinking with this one, but it combines elements of every dangerous quest possible into one. You're defending versus waves, you have little recovery time, you're in a cave, there are fast respawns, there are mobs that run in fear at high speed, you have a very small area to fight in, the list just goes on and on. It's a random out-of-the-way quest in the Stone Talon Mountains called Gorzo's Orders. You've probably not even ever done it, or maybe even seen it. The first wave you have to deal with are 3 kobolds which are around level 20, not too bad that. Followed shortly after by 4 more, all around level 20. This time you have 2 meleeers and 2 casters. This second pull is a lot harder due to the increased damage you'll be taking from the casters. The final pull is 4 level 23 to 24 kobolds, including one with an aura that increases the attack speed of nearby allies by 25%. This is a level 22 quest, by the way, which makes it so much more difficult since your class will be lacking certain key defensive or offensive abilities. And even if you try to kite mobs out of the cave during the quest or pre-clear, respawns will happen during this quest because they just happen that fast here. If there was ever a quest to just skip, this is it, or just really overlevel it. I mean, you do get a decent pair of mail boots out of it, but I'm not sure they're worth the risk. Anyways, those are 10 of my quests which I reckon are the most challenging in Classic to go into unprepared on a hardcore character. It's definitely difficult to narrow it down just to 10 since there are so many that can be problematic, but I tried to go for ones here which more or less any class or spec in the game could have issues with. I guess the summary is escort quests as well as defending against waves of mobs inside of caves are both pretty tough. Did you know that you can do this? Why some chests can be a trap? Or that this random vendor in the middle of nowhere sells something which makes an endgame dungeon much easier? Vanilla WoW is full of strange and often unobvious interactions, and whether you've been playing this game from launch in 2004 or from Classic in 2019, you'll find that throughout playing hardcore, when you really start paying attention, some things don't quite work the way that you thought they did. Either that or you end up learning some things which are completely new. There is always tons to talk about with Vanilla WoW, so I'm back today with 10 more tips for your hardcore journey. First up is the fact that Blizzard have put vendors everywhere in the world, and some of them have very good and unique items on them. The real trick here is knowing where to look. Now, the list of unique items on vendors would be way too big to go over here, so I've been seeing what options there are add-on wise to check out and help you with. And I found through using Handy Notes with Handy Notes NPCs with these options selected, that vendors throughout the world will appear on your minimap alongside a full list of items which they sell. Now, there is the small issue of not being able to hover over the list to, you know, see what stats they have, but often you can make an educated guess based upon the item name as well as the icon. Either that or some good old-fashioned Googling. I mean, it's Classic after all, the game gives you plenty of time between running to different areas. Or you could use this add-on as, I'm in the area, I can see there's a vendor here, let's go check out what they have. You do tend to get very well itemized greens with some combination of your main stat and stamina. The vendor I mentioned at the start is Brokin. He's a goblin in the ruins of Alterac that sells the recipe for alchemists to craft frost oil. Not only is this used in the quest line to unlock the nifty stopwatch, but it's also needed for Diamore North tribute runs in order to trap one of the bosses, meaning you don't have to run the risk of trying to sneak around him, which on a one life character towards the end game is an option you're always going to want. On top of vendors being everywhere, there are also class trainers all over the place as well. With these same settings on Handy Notes, they should also appear on the map for you. Did you know there's a warrior trainer in Theramore, a rogue trainer in Booty Bay, or multiple hunter trainers in Ashenvale? Well, some of them are faction specific, and they can't reset talents like the trainers in big cities can, but hey, if you just got a level and you want to learn some new spell ranks, there might be a trainer a bit nearer than you think. Next is a tip that can be used right from your starter zone to the end game, and that is abusing mob pathing to kite them. Throughout the world, there will be small barriers or ledges, fences that the player can jump over that enemy mobs cannot. When you find one of these, the enemy will have to run the long, or I guess what is the shortest path for them to get to you. As with many things in vanilla WoW, this doesn't always work when you expect it to, or vice versa. Good practice areas include where Princess is in Elwyn Forest, or the ledges around the large building in the ruins of Alterac. It turns dangerous quests such as the one here where you have to defeat 15 elite ogres from something that's really scary and dangerous to not all that bad, provided you are playing a class that can kite them, of course. Either way, if it's a hard quest, look for a place to abuse mob pathing. You can also hit mobs directly through walls. This works because, yeah, I don't know really, it just does work. If a mob is positioned close enough to a wall where it's technically inside of your melee range, you will be able to right click it and aggro it. Bonus points if you're playing a Tauren because they have longer than average attack ranges. The enemy will usually hit you back once before pathing out of whatever building it was onto you. This also works attacking units which are above you, below you, anything really. If it's close enough to a wall, you can hit it. Now this probably isn't always a very good idea, as chances are whenever you hit something, it's going to social aggro a bunch of other mobs on the way out. But if you're playing a class that can handle that situation, it's better than just running into a building and body pulling stuff. Moving on though, everyone loves finding a chest out in the world, and you always feel kind of in a rush to loot it as soon as possible. You don't want that scenario where somebody else rolls up and they take it after you've cleared an area around it. But if you've just barely cleared enough mobs to where you can click it and there are a few left, you probably aren't done yet. When you click on a chest, enemies within line of sight in a small radius will run to defend it. The tip is here to try and line of sight behind something when you click a chest, so not to risk aggroing anything else. You can even still loot chests that are behind solid walls if you're close enough to click them. It works in a similar way to attacking mobs through walls. Next are reset spots. Similar to vendors, they are all over the world and not super obvious to recognize because they're not totally intended as vendors are. A reset spot is a place where the player can get to where mobs have no way to reach them. This will cause them to eventually evade and in time reset. You typically want to look for tree branches that are hanging down, bits of stone ruins that are elevated in some way, or a place where you can jump from one raised platform onto another. Just knowing these things could help you out maybe in a dungeon run that goes wrong where you need to look for an exit. Either that or remember that leaving a group when inside an instance will force hearthstone you after 1 minute has passed, even if you are in combat. Next up, have you ever been in a questing area where you have to kill X type of mobs and there is quite literally zero of what you need spawning? This will be due to shared spawns. Shared spawns are an interesting mechanic which, as their name suggests, mean that certain mobs share respawn timers with others. Some notable examples are the Harpies in Stone Talon Mountains in the quest Harpies Threaten. You have to kill a whole bunch of different Harpies here, and someone at Blizzard threw loads of extras on shared respawn timers. The Horde quest Hunt the Savages in the Hinterlands, the Owl Beasts and Stalkers over there will share spawns, and perhaps the most well-known one are the Spiders and Wolves in Western Plaguelands. Everyone has done this quest at some point and wondered why there are 1 or 2 wolves in the entire zone, when in fact there are loads of them. They just share spawns with the spiders. When you come across a quest with shared spawns, all you can do is get to grinding and force spawn the mob type that you need, until somebody else is on the same quest, zooms in and takes the mob you've been forcing to spawn, that is. How do you recognize you're on a shared spawn quest? Here's the fun part, you don't. Nothing in the game tells you that this is happening. You can only assume if the spawn rates are really bad, it might be a shared spawn quest. Next is a tip I have about threat generation. When you think about threat normally, you think tanks using abilities with bonus modifiers such as Sunder or Heroic Strike, people restoring health from potions or healing, and dealing damage. What also causes threat is pretty much everything else as well, just not as noticeably as those previous examples. If you drink a mana potion, that causes threat. If you buff an ally, that causes threat. If you are in combat and you do a thing, that causes threat. Just be aware of this in group scenarios or when playing a pet class. Also, some classes have bonus threat generation on their abilities, which they kind of don't want, such as Priest Mind Blast, Mage's Counterspell, or Shaman's Earthshock. I guess the lore reasoning is people get mad at you if you attack their mind or something, which is totally different from having a rogue kick you in the face to interrupt a spell that absolutely wouldn't cause bonus threat or anything. Up next is the fact that some of your most class-defining abilities and items are locked behind quests. I really like class quests in vanilla and was kinda sad to see them go in TBC and beyond. I guess the closest we've gotten to them since is a Legion perhaps with the class order halls. That expansion had a ton of class and spec identity. Anyway, sometimes class quests give you a minor reward, such as a green item which is just okay and it can see you through a few levels. Sometimes they give you something which completely changes how you play your character. Druids get Bear Form at level 10 and Aquatic at 16, Paladins get Redemption at level 12, Shamans get Totems from Earth at level 4 to Air at 30, Warlocks will learn most of their demons through quests, and so much more. Class quests are an awesome addition to the game, and whilst not every single one gives you something that's going to completely change the game for you, they're often worth completing sooner rather than later. Now I want to talk about stats and point out in some ways how they are different in vanilla. For example, Spirit is typically seen as a healer stat, but in Classic at low levels it's good for literally every single class in the game due to how health and mana regen works when you're first starting out. Yes, it's even good for rogues and warriors. Many classes scale differently with stats than you would expect too. Shamans gain 2 points of attack power per strength, and agility, at least offensively, only gives them crit. Ferals gain 2 points of attack power per strength too, but when in cap, scale off 1 attack power per point of agility. Rogues also gain 1 attack power per strength, but agility's a better stat as it gives them 1 attack power as well as dodge and crit. Also, agility gives you more stats on top of that, such as 2 armor per point obtained, as well as a small bonus to your dodge chance. Strength, in addition to increasing damage, also increases the amount certain classes can block whilst using a shield by a very small amount. Intellect increases spell critical strike chance and mana, and improves the rate at which your character levels their weapon skills. In Classic, you would sometimes see a warrior with arcane intellect and random bind on equipped cloth gear, just going about and leveling up all the different weapons on the immune mobs in the blasted lands. The simplest stat in the game is probably stamina. 1 point equals gain 10 more health, and for hardcore characters is a stat you need to carefully consider. I like to carry 2 rough item sets, one more offensively set up for mob grinding or easier zones. This will have more of my main stat and my beneficial secondary stats. For example, on a hunter, using items that are of the falcon or of the wolf, versus when I'm starting a new zone, doing elite quests or just higher level things in general, I'd re-equip items which have more stamina on again, just for that extra bit of health. Speaking of stats and farming, there are many classes that can benefit heavily from the 5-second rule. This is after not casting spells which cost mana for 5 seconds, you'll begin to regenerate mana every 2 seconds. The amount will depend on your class and the amount of spirit that you have. It's particularly useful on Priest, Warlock and Hunter. Each of these classes can apply a dot or send a pet in, and then gradually wand or auto shot the target down. And that's about all I have for today. It does feel like whenever you think you know everything about vanilla WoW, there is always something else which you just haven't heard about yet. When WoW first released in 2004, the fundamental design philosophy Blizzard approached the game with was just completely different from how it is now or in any other expansion since. The only way I can put it is there was less foresight for how things may really play out in practice, less worrying about creating difficult situations, and far more emphasis on developers just going ahead and putting something in the game which they think sounds cool. That's why we ended up with world buffs. Hey, you defeated a dragon raid boss? That is pretty cool. On top of an item reward, let's give you a temporary buff. In fact, you know what? Why just buff you? Defeating a Nyxia or Nefarian should be a celebration for everyone, so let's give everyone in the city a buff instead. Did they imagine all this time later people would go around stacking up all these various buffs, logging out to retain their duration and then melting bosses in seconds with them? No, they didn't, but players did. And for many, that's one of the things that makes Classic WoW what it is. This whole just put stuff in the game that's cool or thematic, or probably not terribly well balanced, was something that spanned the whole spectrum of vanilla's gameplay. And recently I've been getting into playing hardcore WoW again and doing vanilla leveling. And one of the things that I've really actively started to look out for is what each mob actually does. A lot of them just run at you in a straight line and start meleeing, but many of them have some kind of buff they use or debuff. and you don't see anything even remotely similar to how punishing debuffs are in classic WoW during leveling. So today I thought I'd try and dig up some of the more dangerous and obscure ones and talk about what makes them so bad, and in some cases what you can do against them. I guess general word of caution here for your hardcore characters too, gotta watch out for those mobs which can root you for 30 seconds or stun you for over 10. Both of which do exist in the game. So why not start off with a category of debuffs which are consistently found throughout Classic: diseases. Often being applied by the undead, there are plenty of diseases which can last a punishing 30 minutes whilst also totally destroying your stats. In terms of dealing with this category of debuffs, priests, paladins and shamans are able to dispel them. There are certain potions craftable through alchemy which can do so too, such as a purification potion. Other than that, for most classes it's just something that you've got to deal with. Some of the worst diseases in the game are applied in Strat Undead. Kind of fits with the whole theme of the instance really. In fact, if you're going in here, having a disease dispel is kind of a big deal. The appropriately named plague ghouls apply, wouldn't you have guessed, Ghoul Plague, reducing both magical and physical damage dealt by 25, as well as a super annoying 20% reduction in move speed for an entire 30 minutes. Another nasty debuff present in the open world is Ghoul Rot. This one can come from a number of different mobs, both found in Eastern Plaguelands as well as Razor Fen Downs. Ghoul Rot straight up reduces your chance to hit by 10% for 10 minutes. This is particularly annoying playing a melee class such as a warrior or a rogue, where it already feels like you're missing a lot of hit chance. But those first two debuffs are kind of just annoying. This next one is super dangerous if you don't understand what it does. Putrid Bile is applied by gargoyles that roam the Eastern Plaguelands. I don't even believe they are part of any quests at all, they're just thrown in there to catch you off guard. So reading the debuff, it says stops regeneration, so you might just think, well, regeneration, that's passive health gain, that's not a big deal. Well, actually no, stop regeneration means you can't gain health in any way at all. No healing spells, health potions, bandages, eating, nothing for 45 seconds. At least it's a shorter duration debuff than the ones we've gone over so far, but when in the Plaguelands, avoid these gargoyles, well, like the plague. But arguably the worst disease debuff in the game is found in southern Ungoro Crater and can be applied by any of the Gorishi Silithid. This debuff increases physical damage taken by an insane 40% or more for an entire 30 minutes. I really don't know what Blizzard were thinking when they came up with this one. Fortunately, there is counterplay even for a melee. This ability has a 2-second cast and only a 5-yard range, so if you see any of them casting, you need to land a CC or dip out of range really fast and you should be okay. Also, I think this debuff is coded kinda weird. If you look at the tooltip on Wowhead, it says only a 10% damage increase debuff, but I've seen it do all kinds of different damage, from 41 or so to 47% at the high end. It seems as though for some reason the power of it actually scales up with your character's level. Either way, try and avoid this one when questing an Ungoro, or endure 30 minutes of pretty much every single attack, feeling as though it's a crushing blow. Next are a few mobs with CC so long you're just left sitting there and contemplating who at Blizzard decided players needed to suffer so much. Such as the number of spiders having access to paralytic poison. This instant cast ability lands a nasty 8-second stun on your character. The Carrion Recluse around Raven Hill and Duskwood have access to this. I nearly had a hardcore character die when pulling one by accident alongside some undead. You just don't really expect an 8-second stun to come out of nowhere, do you? Many basilisks also have a stun too. It's kind of the special move that you can more or less always expect them to do. Crystal Flash is one of the harshest ones, applying a heavy 15-second stun. Though I will say, even though the tooltip doesn't make it obvious, if you take damage after being hit, that it should break. Also, it works in a similar way that Silithid Pox does, so if you see them casting, take a few steps back and dodge it, move back in. There are a number of rare mobs out in the world too that possess totally unique abilities you don't find anywhere else in the game. This can make taking on rares, who are already typically 2 levels higher than other mobs in the area, that bit more dangerous. Now, some range from being fairly harmless, such as Lord Malathrom in Duskwood. He summons 2 adds that can half your move speed and attack speed, but they only have 1 health each. or Commander Felstrom, who casts an ability to resurrect himself at full health whenever he hits about 20%. Some other rares though should not be underestimated. Ekalom is a rare water elemental found in southern Ashenvale. They have a lot of your standard water elemental type stuff such as Frost Shock, but they also have a 3.5 second caster just called Freeze. If this lands, you're going to get hit by a damage over time effect as well as a 15-second stun, almost guaranteeing a visit to the graveyard if you don't have a way to break it. So if by chance you see this mob out in the world and you don't have some CC ready, well, get prepared to find some line of sight somewhere. Another rare mob which can easily catch you off guard is Naraxis in Duskwood. This spider's found in a secluded cave on the eastern side of the zone, which has an instant cast 30-second route. Now, to be fair, this is nowhere near as bad as a stun, and almost every class has tools to at least delay a fight for a long time. But the fact someone at Blizzard just straight up threw a 30-second route on this mob is, well, it's classic for you, isn't it? Some dev out there thought, yeah, rare spider, let's just boost their ability up to 10. So now we've covered some diseases and some long duration debuffs that can catch you off guard. Some other debuffs though aren't quite this sinister. Some of them are just really annoying. And when I think annoying plus debuff, there is truly only one which stands above all others. I'm going to give you a clue. Quest in Lower Blackrock Spire involving a spider. I'm sure if you've ever actually gone to the trouble of completing this quest, you already know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, well, you aren't really missing out on much, to be fair. So during the Mother Smolderweb fight, you get affected by Mother's Milk. This frequently triggers a 10-second undispellable route on all allies in 30 yards, with no diminishing return and no internal cooldown. There is a quest where a dwarf in Northern Burning Steppes wants you to run from Lower Blackrock Spire with this debuff all the way back to him so he can, milk you. Hey, it's their quest wording, not me, okay? Most people use the immature venom sacs the nearby spiders drop to just get rid of this debuff and be about their day. I don't think I've ever had a group in LBRS with the patience to run this debuff all the way back for the quest. Maybe this is one that if you want to do, you go for it solo at some point. Next is a very unique debuff that just one set of satyrs in the entire game have access to. The Bleak Heart satyr in Eastern Ashenvale can often hit you with Curse of the Bleak Heart. And reading the tooltip, it kinda just, well, doesn't tell you anything about what it actually does, but believe me, you're gonna be finding out how annoying this debuff can be sooner rather than later. Whilst affected, every second you have a 5% chance to be hit by chest pains. This 5-second stun forces your character to kneel down in pain twice in a row and suffer minor shadow damage. The fun part about this debuff is it has no diminishing return, no internal cooldown, and can proc while you're already affected by it. Technically speaking, it could stun you for the entire 3 minute of the curse's duration, at which point, I don't know, go buy a lottery ticket or something because those odds are crazy. Either way, it's not too rare to be hit back to back by this debuff, leading to a hefty 10-second plus stun and some damage. Don't take on too many mobs when this is running, or maybe you just get super unlucky and die. Honourable mentions now, since I've got to include these two on the list somewhere. There's certain oozes out in the world which when they get to low health begin casting Clone. This does exactly what you expect it to do. The one I remember doing this the most are the primal oozes over in Ungoro. Definitely interrupt this one. But the most annoying mobs to deal with without an interrupt have to be the Curzon Medicine Men. At some point you get to those quests in northeastern Stranglethorn Vale and have to deal with these guys, who have a full-on good priest toolkit. They use Inner Fire, Renew, and Heal. The former two spells are already annoying enough to get through, but when you get their health to about 30% or low and they begin casting a heal, if they finish that cast, they are going straight back to 100% health again. They aren't the most dangerous mobs out there as they're just bashing you with a staff, but for many classes, it's like defeating two mobs at once, so they have so much health. Now I want to cover some abilities which you just kind of wouldn't know how they work until you see them firsthand. What I mean by this is if a mob casts Entangling Roots, you know you're about to get rooted. If a mob casts Fireball, you're going to get hit by a ball of fire. Some abilities clearly telegraph what's about to happen. The ones I'm going to talk about here do not. Or some of them do to an extent, but can still be a nasty surprise. One of the final quests you might go for in Red Ridge Mountain has you battle to the top of a tower to take on the powerful sorcerer Mor'Ganth. It's already a tough battle to reach the top, having to go through loads of Shadowhide gnolls and demonic dogs. Mor'Ganth himself also has an active demon and 2 nearby gnolls. But the real catch here is when you get him to about half health, is that he summons a minion of Mor'Ganth, which is a non-elite level 30 patchwork golem. This summon has way too high of a level and far too much health for you to reasonably be able to take down at the level you're expected to do this quest. Even if you have a decently sized party, it's a difficult fight. You just want to try and burn down the boss as soon as possible and then run down the tower and reset. If the gnolls below haven't already started respawning, that is. Spoiler, they probably will have. This fight can be a real death trap for unprepared groups, so CC him during the cast or just nuke him down. Next is an ability that's particularly deadly for melee attackers, whilst kind of just being a free ticket for ranged DPS. And it's only found on 2 mobs in the entire game, the Dalaran Shield Guards and the Curzon Subchief. It's called Violent Shield. It roots the mob in place and grants them bonus armor, but also reflects 85 damage back to melee attackers. So if you're on any class that attacks fast, you can absolutely delete your own health bar on these guys if you aren't paying attention. I remember leveling a rogue in Classic and wondering where my health was going before I actually stopped to read what this ability does. Basically, when they go red and stop moving, it's time for you to stop attacking. Jadefire Satyrs in Felwood do something quite similar. It's just called Jadefire. This time only reflects 50 damage instead, but as a trade-off they can continue attacking for the duration. Either way, it's a nasty debuff and can really eat into your health on a melee class. Next is an ability very few mobs in the entire game have, called Putrid Stench. You'll most likely run into this when doing the Cauldron quests in Western Plaguelands. It's an instant cast 10-second silence, which also reduces your stats by a good amount as well. It can definitely chain together with there being other invisible mobs in the area to make a difficult scenario. One of the mobs I always think to be careful against are deep into Gnomeregan. You know that final hallway leading up to Mechaneer Thermoplug? I mean, the Dark Irons are already bad enough with their landmine spam, but the real dangers here can be the Arcane Nullifiers. They have 2 abilities. First of all, they can cleanse any debuff from themselves and nearby targets every few seconds, meaning tactics involving CC can easily fail, as well as do an AoE spell reflection on all nearby allies for 5 seconds, meaning if the mage or warlock isn't quite paying attention, they can very quickly get their own frost bolts or shadow bolts straight back to their own face. Speaking of buffs and of dungeons, one of the most dangerous boss fights has to be right at the end of Blightrot Depths. It's already a very hard-fought journey to get to the throne room, where the final boss, Emperor Dagran Thaurissan, awaits you. This fight has a number of things that can cause problems. The nearby princess will attempt to heal him if you're choosing to save her, and Thaurissan himself is wielding Iron Foe, meaning sometimes he's just gonna proc extra attacks and remove half your tank's health in one global. But the scary bit is when he uses his ability, Avatar of Flame, making him totally immune to magic for 10 seconds and gaining even more damage on his extra attacks. It can be pretty stressful watching this fight as a caster, hoping the tank doesn't get randomly globaled and waiting for Avatar of Flame to wear off, but the rewards at the end of the dungeon are definitely well worth it. Finally, 2 for fun abilities you might not have known about. Did you know there's a debuff in Classic WoW that lasts for 7 days? As part of the rogue quest to learn how to craft poisons, you will get affected by the Touch of Zanzil. This reduces your agility by a hefty 15, as well as reducing your stealth level by -50, which is pretty much the same as saying your stealth doesn't work anymore. You're basically just RP walking in stealth for fun, without the whole being undetectable part. You can remove this debuff as part of a follow-up quest, using a first aid anti-venom, or just have a druid, paladin, or anyone else that can remove poisons get rid of it for you. Last but not least, as part of the Scourge invasion event in Classic, additional bosses spawn in certain lower level dungeons. In Scarlet Monastery Graveyard, there is a brand new boss called Scorn. He has an ability that deals damage to you and knocks you back. Do you know what someone at Blizzard decided to call this? Lich Slap. You know someone had fun when they came up with this, and probably that they only got it put in the game as this boss was going to be a limited duration one. I think it goes to show, as mentioned at the start, the vanilla devs were really just out there putting unique stuff in the game which they thought sounded cool or made sense thematically, or was just plain fun. And it is something, especially during the leveling portion of the game, that was moved away from in later expansions. And it's one of the things that, for me at least, makes vanilla leveling that bit more memorable and replayable. Are there any other buffs or debuffs which particularly stand out to you in the game? Drop them down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all on the next one very soon.